there. Thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast. This is Lauren, and I manage the Adulting is Easy blog and podcast, which can be found at realadultingiseasy.com. Please take a second to hit the follow button wherever you're listening if you can safely do so. So I'm joined today by Clint. He is a husband and father of two young boys, now 10 and 13. By day, he's a chief financial officer, and in the evenings, he reads, invests, writes a fantasy novel series, and hosts the Pursuit of Learning podcast. Clint, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I love the concept that adulting is easy because it definitely is not. So the more we can share this information, the easier it is for all of us.
Exactly. I have hopes that someday all listeners will be able to say, hey, you know what? Maybe adulting is easy. So we're going to make it easier for our listeners and move them down the continuum from adulting is really hard to adulting is really easy, because managing money is a huge part of adulting. So I'm so excited to talk to you, Clint. You have such an amazing story, and your financial journey has been, first of all, I don't think you can look at it under any metric and think it hasn't been successful. However, it has not been this linear upward slope that we typically see, whether it's on social media or just because of, recent market conditions. So why don't you kick us off and I guess start wherever you want to in your journey and how you first got into personal finance?
Sure. I can say how I got into personal finance, and then I'll rewind a little and tell where the journey started on our financial. And when I describe personal finance, what I quickly learned the more reading I did was it boiled down to three things. One, earn more. Two, spend less. And then three, invest the leftovers, whether you have an emergency fund or not, and how much it is. I've never typically gotten into. I've simply said I'm going to earn more, I'm going to spend less, and I'm going to invest the difference. The earning more concept is something I've been focused on from the moment I got out of school. So I was always pushing for the next promotion, driving myself in my career. I was fortunate enough to have my partner at a very young age. We started dating when we were 16, 17 years old. So we were always aligned on that mission. She had said to me very early on, I want to be able to be home with our family at a reasonable hour. I want you to work hard and make money. So we were aligned there, and she was always supportive in helping me be able to do that. The problem was I never understood the concept around saving and spending less. And so I allowed my lifestyle creep to get in the way. And the first failure, I would say, happened along the way, because what I really want to be able to do, and you and I have talked about, is it's not always wins. So I want to share what some of the losses were along the way. And the first loss was, Lauren, that I was working so hard to move my career forward that something went wrong mentally, and I didn't catch it quick enough. And I ended up getting diagnosed with depression. But somewhere in there, I made a decision to move my family away from Vancouver, and we sold our home. It was just a one bed and den condo downtown. But by the time we moved back to Vancouver 4 years later, and I had the mental health issues under control, the home had more than doubled in value. The entire real estate market effectively had doubled in value. So now I'm back home. We're having our first child. And I thought to myself, wow, I'll never recover from this, right? My ability to make up for a doubling in the market will be impossible.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and for being open about that mental health struggle that you had. It's interesting that it can affect, it affects every part of your life. I can say from experience. I similarly was diagnosed with depression about 4 years ago. It took me a while to catch on to what it was. And it did lead to some interesting financial decisions in the sense that, like, I bought a BMW and I bought like this quote unquote like forever home. And then once I started to get better, I kind of didn't want that home or that BMW anymore. So it's interesting to me that during that process, you made this decision to leave. And then as you got better, you were like, you know what, I really want to go back.
Yeah, the decision to leave was definitely a mistake in hindsight. And to your point, you don't know why. And when we landed on the other side, we were in Bermuda for the first 2 years and then Toronto for 2 years. And in the Toronto was a decision that was made when I had resolved the challenges and it was a good situation. But in Bermuda, it was the first time in my career that I wasn't performing at work. And
Hmm.
that was the first red flag. And I wasn't catching it until someone who was at the time dating my wife's cousin, who was also over there, said to me when we were out for dinner, said, "Hey, I don't know you that well, but from what I've heard from my girlfriend, this is not who you are. And maybe you should call the EAP line. Maybe there's something that you don't know." And so that was a bit of a wake up call, and it was probably life saving, really.
Yeah.
And once I was back online, it was depression wasn't there, but the logic was, and I realized the mistake I had made with the real estate. And so now when we were back in Vancouver, and I realized that if I fast forward a few years, I'd left KPMG, the audit firm I was at, and I took a role in industry in real estate. And I started to see the power of real estate and what it could do. And we were living out in the suburbs, if you imagine, about 30, 40 minutes outside of the core where we normally would want to live.
Hmm.
And we never thought we could get back into the core. And then Vancouver had the 2010 Olympics. And just after the Olympics, there was an area in Vancouver where they had housed all the athletes, known as Olympic Village. And it
Hmm.
was right close to the core, right on the water, beautiful area. But because of everything that had happened, timing in the market, people weren't buying the units. They were very heavily priced. And everyone was referring to it as a ghost town. They were saying no one would want to live here.
Hmm.
And none of that made any sense to me.
Just
It
logically, this is
just
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, logically it was beautiful. It was, I thought if I could afford it, I would buy every home here. But they were selling for a lot. And then a developer launched a project and he was worried about not selling because for listeners who don't know, in certain markets like Vancouver, when you want to build a mid-rise or a tower, before the bank gives you money, they require you to have a certain level of pre-sales. And so this developer wanted to make sure he could hit. So he redesigned his units to be a little smaller. He came back to market with really low price points. And we ended up being lucky and we bought the largest townhome unit that was in the complex. So it was a 3-bed and den. And we bought it for a very low price. And we were able to sell our townhouse in the burbs for effectively the same price. And so we felt like we were going to be in control of our financial situation again. Everything looked rosy. And that's where the second failure happened. And this is where I found personal finance. I was at a job in real estate. I'd been there for 3 years. The company was going through a lot of shakeup. There were two different companies kind of merging into one, and no one knew where they were going to end up in this. My boss had been telling me there was room for growth. I could grow from that director level to the VP level, which was the next step to becoming a CFO, which was my goal. He had lunch with me and said, that opportunity we talked about isn't there. Do you want to stay and just keep doing what you're doing, or do you want to move on and we can help you, give you some time and help you? And being a pretty competitive human, I chose to move on. The only dilemma was we now had our second son. The townhouse that we were going to move into wasn't finished. It was a few months away, let's say 9 months, and we were going to have to close on it. and we still hadn't sold the townhouse we were living in. Our ability to carry two mortgages would have been challenging with both of us working full time, let alone with me without a job. So effectively, once again, I put the family in an entirely stressful situation with my decision to grow my career and not being willing to sit idle. And so that was a high stress situation. And what it made me realize was I can never be caught like this again. And so I started to dive very, very deep, as I always do.
So with those, so you had two mortgages. So you were this is after you sold the place in the burbs, is that right?
We hadn't sold it yet. We just knew
Okay.
what we knew what the value was. So we said, okay,
Okay.
we're going to be able to sell it for this and buy for this.
Okay, got it. So you were still under this idea of I'm going to use real estate because real estate is powerful, but you were primarily focused on building equity in a primary home. Would you say that that's accurate?
At this point, yes, that's right.
Okay. So that's interesting, and I think a lot of people start there. And again, I admire that you were like you basically stood on your principles. You're like, no, I'm better than this. I should be a VP. I should be on my path to CFO. Director is not where I want to stay for my whole life. So in a lot of ways, that is super admirable. But on the other hand, I guess you need to have some assets, some net worth to fall back on in order to make that decision. Would you say that that's right?
That's absolutely accurate. So this is where the emergency comes in. This is where the concept in FI that we talk about with FU money comes in,
Yes.
so that you can make that call and say, hey, no, what you want for me doesn't align with what I want for me, so I'm going to walk away. And I hadn't set myself up that way. I was just convicted. And the first 4 months of the search, we'd agreed on 6 months, Lauren. The first 4 months, crickets. My fear was through the roof. And then the last 2 months, three or four things came in really quickly. And I was able to pursue two of them and then let those go because the two that came next were both VP finance roles within real estate. And so there was a great opportunity that I could look at which one was the best one. I ultimately chose the wrong one, but I was only there for about 6 months, and in that 6 months, I found the role that I'm at now. So I've been with this company for 8 years, and I grew. I came in to be a successor to the CFO, and so trained for 3 years, and then stepped into the role. And so ultimately, I was able to land that exact dream job that I wanted and use it to grow my career, grow my wealth. And that's when we started making decisions around investing. So if I rewind right before I started, I didn't want to be in that situation again. So I said, I have to learn. And I read almost every blog at the time from Mr. Money Mustache. If people know who he is, he's pretty famous on the don't spend money side. And so I learned a lot of that. Unfortunately, my lifestyle had already creeped up fairly past what he talks about. So the
You weren't biking everywhere.
yeah, exactly. I wasn't biking everywhere and walking and all the hacking. I didn't have my fish and plant system built in the backyard. So it was quite challenging to get to those low numbers, but what I was able to do was reduce further lifestyle creep. So as I grew in my career from that director to the VP to the CFO, I didn't really move my spending that much. And so all the additional money I was able to make was able to go into investments. And that's when we started to invest decently heavy into real estate. When we were in the townhouse, we had, because we bought it early, that it was built, when we moved in, the market had responded to what you and I talked about. Hey, wait, this is a great place to live. And so the value by the time we moved into it, Lauren, was already about 1.1. So we were up about 400,000 in value on a $700,000 purchase price. And then if you flip back, if it's 700,000 and we did our 20% down, we were only in it for 140,000.
Wow.
And so that 400,000 lift right away, you're tripling your money. And so there's quite a few people in the Twitter money world who talk about the power of leverage in real estate and how it works in your favor when you're buying in a rising market. Of course, obviously in a falling market, leverage can hammer you. But if you're in an area where you believe in the growth, you'll be able to do quite well. And what we were able to do with that leverage was we took out a home equity line of credit. There were some projects that we knew that were being built that we were convicted in as investments for rental. And there were also some real estate lending opportunities that I had available. And so we purchased two investment condos in 2014. And between 2014 and 2016, the real estate market in Vancouver was incredibly frothy. It was pretty close, Lauren, to another doubling. So those two
Oof.
investments we picked up, plus the townhouse that we were in,
Right.
they all went through the roof in terms of price. I was also working in real estate. We were getting a little nervous about where the market was. And I personally was getting a little bit scared. Whenever there's froth, it feels like, hey, now's the time to sell.
Right.
But with real estate, you never want to get out of your home because the ability to get back in if it keeps going is over. Right? You can
Right.
never
Right.
you can never keep up with your investments on the outside. And so what we ended up doing, one of the two investments we made, they were both pre-sales. And again, so they were towers that were getting built. One of them we did what was called an assignment. We said to someone else, we're going to assign you our right to buy this unit for this price. Made some good money, and that allowed us to be a little less stressed. And we made a decision because we looked at it and said, multifamily townhomes will probably not go up as much in value as single family homes, because single family homes in the area we desired to live, there weren't any more being built. In fact, they were being torn down each year.
Question
And
about
so,
that.
yeah,
Was
fire.
was there a desire from, I don't know, the government or whatever the jurisdiction to increase density on purpose? Is that why that was happening?
It wasn't on purpose, and the government, and this is a problem everywhere, and it's one of the reasons that I invest so heavily into real estate, is there ought to be an incentive for a government to increase density and make the redevelopment process simpler to address the supply side of the demand side equation.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they never seem to tackle that side. They just focus on demand side metrics. And so that was the next big hit that we took. We made the decision to go to the single family. And in hindsight, probably the one of the worst financial decisions I ever made for my family. It was definitely ego driven. And I can look at that in hindsight now and say that, Lauren, at the time, it was driven by I'm Canadian, but also that American dream of I wanted a house for my family. I wanted a yard. I wanted to be able to park my car in my driveway,
Yeah.
not in the parkade of my concrete monolith. And so I pushed the decision and got my wife on side with it. And what ended up happening was we sold the townhouse for a substantial lift. It had gone up another 500,000 in value from the number I shared earlier.
So that's the one that you that was in the Olympic Village. You bought for 700. By the time you closed on it and moved in, it was worth 1.1. So now it's worth, what did you say then?
Yeah, I
When you
think we
sold it?
sold it for around 1.65.
Okay.
So we effectively made $1 million on that, and I felt very good. I started to create a thesis, and I talk about theses a lot because it's how I tend to map out my next 10 years, what I'm going to be doing from an investment perspective. And things felt very good. We bought a lot in the exact neighborhood we wanted. You know, we moved a little east in Vancouver. You tend to go where you can afford, so we moved in the direction of affordability for where we were at that point in our lives. And the area my wife gave me, she said, "Hey, I'm only going to go single family if you're in this area," and she drew, the east-west boundary and the north-south, and we landed almost pin dot in the middle of it. So I felt very happy there. And the to your point about supply side, demand side, 2 weeks after we moved in, or not moved in, sorry, 2 weeks after we closed on the land, we were going to tear the building down and build a new house. It was a very old building. So we were going to tear that down and build new. 2 weeks after we moved in, the government brought in the first of what ended up being about a dozen demand side shocks. And what it was it was referred to as foreign buyer tax one, which implies that there were other foreign buyer taxes that came in later. And what it was, Lauren, was a 15% tax on people that were buying real estate in Vancouver that were from specific or that were non residents. And so the fear at that time was that a lot of the money that was driving our real estate was coming from mainland China. And so the government said, hey, if you're not a BC resident or if you're not a Canadian resident and you're buying real estate here, you're going to pay a 15% tax. So immediately, we make the biggest acquisition in our family's history. And the price, it just absorbed that tax. So the price went down about 15% on the
Right,
dirt.
right. And the idea there, this is how a lot of decisions and taxes and things made by government work, but the idea is to protect Canadian residents from being priced out of their own local market because of foreign investment coming in and driving up prices, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But the result of that is then there's less demand for that real estate and thus the price goes down, which hurts the local residents that own real estate at the time.
Exactly right. So it hurts those who own real estate. And I guess what the government's saying is, hey, look, the people that it hurts, most of you bought this house 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20. You all have so much lift on it. We're just knocking a little of your equity away.
Right. These people that
And
theoretically have 100% increase on their equity or whatever it is,
yes,
but not the people who bought 2 weeks ago.
which of course, right? They're never going to, it's never going to be perfect. They're saying,
No.
hey, for those of you who have big lift, we've knocked a little bit of away of it. And some people who had that lift would, people that were parents of young kids or grandparents would say, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Sure.
Because what it's going to do is it's going to allow that young family to buy a place.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Imagine a young family looking for a home exactly at the right time.
Yeah. If we had bought 3 weeks later, we would have been way better off, but that was fine. We could make that up. The downside then was because of all the rules around building and the complexities of building in the city, we were about 50% over in terms of our timeline. And then because of the land that we bought, there were some geotechnical issues, which for listeners is under the earth. And so that's generally when you're in real estate development, most real estate developers will tell you that's always where you lose the money is underground.
Yeah.
Because you do your research, but you tend not to be able to find everything. And
right. Because before you buy something, you can't be there tearing it up.
well, you somewhat can be more. So it's the right way to phrase this one. Because the foreign buyer tax wasn't in, And because the market was frothy, it was one of those situations, roughly like it is today, Lauren, in a lot of markets, where when you wanted to buy a house, you were going in
Right.
slightly above ask with no subjects.
Yeah, very few contingencies, very
Very,
few
very
outs.
few.
Right. With the idea, just for listeners, when you're making an offer on, let's just back it off of, development. Let's just talk about a regular house for a second.
Yes.
If you are coming, if someone is selling a home, let's say the home is worth $200,000, which somewhere here in Florida there are still those houses, and you're coming in with a 20% down payment, a 3-day inspection period, right? That offer is going to be more enticing to the seller than a 3.5% FHA loan with an FHA inspection and a 10-day inspection period, right? That's just naturally that the odds of selling to the person with the greater down payment and the shorter inspection period are higher than selling to this other person. So the seller is going to go with that more enticing offer. In this case, right? If somebody comes in and says, okay, I want to buy your land, I want to buy it for exactly what you're asking, not a cent over, and I want to do 6 months of tests or however long, that's going to be less enticing than someone that says, all right, I'm willing to do 5% over asking and I'm willing to do 1 month of tests or whatever it is.
Yeah, and Lauren, the market was to the point where you basically said, I'm waiving tests, no subjects. I've already
Right.
been pre-approved by my bank, so I know I have the money, and I know I'm going to tear down the building. So here's my offer. Let's go ahead.
And you had the
And
cash because from the townhouse. So you were able to just
we'd
pay
already
cash for it.
sold. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd
Yeah.
already sold, so we were good there to buy the dirt, and we'd been to our mortgage broker. We had the money lined up. So what ended up happening? We were about 50% over schedule, and we were also about 50% over budget. And so we wiped out, between all of that, we wiped out half of the win that we had on the townhouse development. And so all those plans that I had drawn up for the next 10 years went out the
Right.
window.
Meaning that $1 million you made was actually like 500,000.
500,000. Yeah,
Right.
we cut it in half. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was, it's like all these things, Lauren, you think, again, right? Here's the third one. I thought, wow, I'm not going to recover from that. This is rough. And in our market, it was, once that tax came in and they started hitting all the other supply side metrics, or demand side metrics, that they brought in another foreign buyer tax, they increased property taxes, they brought in some vacancy taxes, so if you had a unit and you weren't renting it out, you paid another tax. And so the market just started getting hammered with, there ended up being about a dozen measures that got brought in, whether it was, and that was the fun part, it was municipal, provincial, federal. And so if we go into the US, that would be municipal, state, federal. Am I
Right. So it's like at
correct?
the city or county level, at the state level, and then at the country level, just left and right taxes and
Yes.
regulations.
Yes. All three were playing with the levers that were available to them. At the country level, they were bringing in rules around mortgage financing that the banks would have to follow.
Mhm.
And so everything combined to basically put a damper on the market and drive it down.
But
Right.
at this point, you are hardened. You are determined. You have been knocked down. You've gotten back up a couple of times. So, really, in some ways, at this point, you're kind of poised for success, maybe?
Yes, yes. And somewhere in there I left it out, but somewhere we'd already bought another townhouse out in the valley. And so where we were at was, at that point in time, we had the single family house, we had one investment apartment, and we had one investment townhouse, and we had some cash still and some lines available to us. And so 2018, 2019 were pretty dark years in real estate. And I started to think, what is my ideal tenant? What is my ideal unit size and mix? and made the decision that instead of having smaller investment units in the city, which tend to have higher turnover and a different tenant type, I wanted to have families living in my homes that would live in them for longer periods of time. And I wanted them to be bigger homes that would become less and less available as development over time went smaller. And so the idea was if single family homes aren't being built anymore, eventually we're not even going to be building townhouses. We're going to be building low rise apartments, and townhouses will be more valuable. So I made a decision in 2018. I ended up putting pre-sale contracts on 4 townhouses somewhere in that 2018-2019 timeframe, when the market was effectively, the quote I like is when the blood is running in the street, because no one wanted to buy, right? So the developers, there were incentives for the homes. Hey, if you buy this, we'll knock the price down by this.
People don't want to buy because they're scared of more regulations. Is that right?
They were scared of more regulations, and it just happens. And this is what a lot of the listeners you and I talked about who haven't been in downturns, they happen slowly, and then it speeds up. And then once you're down and you're in that bear market, sometimes it can last years.
Yes.
And for us, it was about 2 years that the prices were just flat, if not slightly down, and no one knew when they would come back up.
Right.
And to me, that's when you buy.
Sure.
Right? When other people are afraid to buy, you put your money in. And so we put it in. And then in 2020, and 2 of them we've closed on, Lauren. 2 of them we closed on about 9 months ago, and 2 of them we still hadn't closed on. We close in March of next year. And coming into 2020, the market in the city started to heat back up. So you started to feel a little bit like, hey, real estate's coming back.
I know where this is going.
And then COVID hit. And oh my gosh,
I know.
I'm the CFO of the company. My job is to make sure the lights always stay on. I was doing a new cash flow almost every day.
Wow.
With what if scenarios, right?
Yeah.
What if the banks close and don't give us money to build our projects? What if no one is able to buy a home? What if we can't sell homes? What if? And we were doing that almost daily. Our leadership team was meeting every single day for hours to talk about how to respond to COVID, right? And so that became all consuming. And the market did slow down. It retrenched for about 3 months. And then we started to see some life. And then that life became a spark. And then that spark, by about July, became a fire. In the next 6 months to a year, real estate went up about 30 to 40% in value. And so we hadn't closed on them yet, but we had them under contract. So the value lift in all 4 of those townhomes, we were able to be the beneficiary of, because ultimately we were going to close at the price we'd written on the contract, not the price that they were selling at today. And so there was a win. At that time we had our single family house. We erased most of the deficit with that increase in values, because single family homes, more than anything, went up in value during the rise, Lauren.
Yep.
Largely because it's COVID, people wanted space. Right. So the larger the unit you had, the better off you are. And so for us, we had one investment condo that probably didn't really move, because not many people wanted to move into a small 1-bed condo during COVID, although it had its own front door. So a bit of attraction to that. And other than that, it was 5 townhouses, and most of them were 2 to 3 bedrooms. Plus the single family home. So that more than erased the deficit that we had from building the house. So it seemed every single time we got knocked down as a family, there was always an opportunity to make it back up. And for our listeners, they may think, oh, well, it was easy. You had money. You were able to buy that townhouse in Olympic Village. When we made that decision, my wife was pregnant with our second son. I remember telling her how good of an opportunity it was, and her in tears because she didn't think it was viable, didn't think we had the cash or that would be able to come up with the equity, and us just battling ultimately we agreed to pull the trigger. And she had such a challenge to figure out, Lauren, how to make it happen.
Yeah.
Like she found, and I don't know if any listeners have used them, she found 0% interest credit cards that
Yeah.
if you paid them off within your 12 months, you didn't pay interest. And we've been carrying balances on those 0% credit cards now for 9 years, right?
Wow.
Each
Yeah.
year we just renew the card, reapply, get a new card. And
Yep.
before the FI community crucifies me, we always have home equity lines of credit that aren't drawn, or personal lines of credit. It just
Yep.
makes no sense not to take 0% money when
Absolutely.
it's
Yep.
available. So when she was trying to find every tool and trick that she could to get cash, and was able to do it. And so there's always a way, and that's part of what I want listeners to know. The market, whether it's the stock market, whether it's the real estate market, it always seems like it's at the highest. And yes, it absolutely could go down, but it's like your life. Today, you're the oldest you ever have been. You are also the youngest you ever will be. So even if markets seem out of reach, if they keep going at the average increase that has been happening since time began, they're going to be more out of reach tomorrow than they are today. So whatever your idea is, you just have to start.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. There's a lot of people that are waiting right now, especially in the real estate market. They're waiting for the downturn. And there's an increase in people that are selling houses and renting waiting for the downturn, right? And it's not that that might not happen, right? There might be a downturn, but there might not be, or the real estate market might go up another 10 or 20% before there is one. And then it'll be back to where we were today, for example. So that's my philosophy is, if it's almost like dollar cost averaging in the stock market, which means, you buy $100 worth of stock over a period of time. Say once a month, you buy $100 worth of stock, right? Sometimes that stock is more expensive. Sometimes that stock is cheaper, but it's called dollar cost averaging because it averages out over time. Actually, it goes up. So technically, you're over time going to be paying more for stock than if you could have bought the whole bit in the beginning. But real estate's kind of like that. You kind of dollar cost average with real estate. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm buying a little hot right now, but I bought 2 years ago when it was really cheap, right? And then I'm going to buy in 2 years, and I'm going to buy 2 years after that, or whatever that cadence is. If you keep buying, then it is what it is. Why would you try to time the market? There's no reason to try that. I mean, and Clint, you and your family are such a great example, right? You bought it maybe like the worst time ever, right? 2 weeks before these regulations started, almost like the is it the Smash Mouth song? Like
Yeah.
they just started coming and they didn't stop coming for like a while, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're still well in the black. So you are better off having done that than the people that did nothing at that time, I would say. And that's kind
Yeah.
of typically how investing always seems to be.
And I have I'd say a friend now on Twitter, and he's a very bright college professor, and him and I talk a lot about real estate. And he does a lot of work around a lot of research around equities and understands margining and what is your risk of total risk of loss, if you will,
Yeah.
if prices adjust and you're on margin. And he kind of looks at real estate a little the same way. And
Hmm.
part of what I pointed out to him was real estate's a little different. If you're talking about having a family, even if I lost some money on that single family house build, ultimately that will be the greatest investment I ever make. And I know the FI community will go off on me for that one because it's your single family home. It shouldn't be an investment. But we have to remember that investments aren't just about money. I am now in a house that we hope will be our forever home. My children, we've been in there a year and a half, so they were 11 and 9 or 11 and 8. And the memories that we're going to have from living in that home for a decade, the proximity to their school, to my work, so that I'm able to be home quickly, it's immeasurable. The benefit that we'll have from the home as a family is I can't overstate it, especially during COVID. I'm fortunate enough to have a separate little building in the backyard that's sort of my office man cave. So while working from home, I was able to be reasonably independent. And even taking away the non-financial aspects and looking at the financial, based on where the home is, the fact that over the next decade, they're probably going to be tearing away 10, 20, 30% of the single family homes in that area, the increase in value of the home will be very significant, especially when you take leverage into account. And I'm not counting on it as part of my ability to retire, though it definitely will be able to factor in down the road if we make that decision
Hmm.
as an alternative.
Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. People say, do you include your primary home in your net worth? There's really only one answer to that. Yes, it is part of your net worth. There's really no question. I don't really understand why it's a debate, right? It's something that is called, for the most part, a personal use asset. And if you want to allocate some of it to an investment asset section of your balance sheet, I really have no problem with that. For example, if your plan is to buy a pretty nice house, maybe it's a little bit tight, but you believe in the appreciation and you're going to live there for 10 or 20 years while you raise your family, and then you have the option to downsize or straight up move or what have you, and you could tap that equity for retirement, right? If you can tap
Exactly.
equity for if you can tap equity for retirement, it's an investment, period. And while I'm on this rant, it's also an asset. Okay. We can't, your primary home is a liability. Sure, there's costs associated with it, but purely based on definition, I am sorry, rich dad, poor dad, your house is an asset by accounting definition. And I will die on that hill as well. Right now, are there smart ways to make your house make you money versus cost you money? Sure, but it's still an asset.
Yeah, and Lauren, I look at it and I'm with you. I am an accountant, and it's a hill I'm willing to die on, especially when you live in high cost of living cities. The amount of equity that you end up having tied up in your personal residence is very, very high. And when I think about it, what I like to point out, I usually am willing to say on social media that for the average person, their principal residence or their personal house is the greatest investment they'll ever make. And that's largely because of the forced savings mechanism attached to it,
Yes.
right? I pay my mortgage every month. I'm effectively paying down a loan, which means my equity is going up. And if rent is slightly cheaper in the area you live in, you're only better off between the rent and the mortgage if you actually take that differential and invest it in the market.
Right.
And so if the average person is not doing that, then they're way better off just having the mortgage and paying down that debt.
Absolutely. Right? How many people have the discipline to do that. A lot of people, whatever cash they have, they will spend. So if you're that kind of a person, forcing yourself to make the payment and pay down your house, right? Because every month you're going to have at least a few $100s where you're paying down your liability on the house, therefore
Mm-hmm.
increasing your net worth, right? And on top of that, if the value in the home is going up, then you have kind of equity coming out of both directions. One, the value of the house is going up, and two, you're paying down your loan. So it's not particularly debatable to me. That said, I house hack, right? I don't have kind of a
Beautiful.
true single family primary home. So I am on the rich dad, poor dad track in the sense of I want my house to pay for itself. I want my property to pay for itself, even if I am living there. But even if it wasn't, I'm not ruling out a traditional single family home in my future. I'm just going to lay this foundation first.
Am I allowed to say I house hack if I have a basement suite?
Is it rented out?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, then I'm partially house hacking as well.
That's it.
Legal suite in the basement that we rent out each month to help cover some of the mortgage for sure.
Absolutely. Yes, that's
Yeah.
the definition of house hacking. And I'm a huge fan of it. I didn't do it at first. Like I said, and sincerely thank you for bringing up the mental health issues that you have had. I don't think I've ever talked about it on the podcast, but I was absolutely diagnosed with depression in 2017. And I made kind of the traditional financial decisions at that time. And I came out of it. And one of the realizations I had was, this is not actually what I want. It seemed like what I wanted when my brain chemistry wasn't right. Now that my brain
Mm-hmm.
chemistry is on track, I kind of want a house hack, and really buckle down financially for a few more years to build my future.
Oh, it's a beautiful way to do it. Absolutely. And when you can get to that spot where the mental clarity is there and you're making the right decisions, it's such a better feeling knowing. To me, there's nothing better than knowing that you can be financially free at some point. And it doesn't mean you don't have to work or you don't have to do something. I'll always want to be busy. It's that I'll just get to choose what I'm busy with.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I love that you are willing to take risks, right? And and I hope the listeners have learned from this, even what can seem like a terrible setback, a $500,000 net worth hit, right? You can still turn
Yeah.
around. I mean, would you mind sharing kind of some of your current numbers before we wrap up, so they can see where you are now?
Yeah, we're sitting right now at about 3.5 million in net worth. And what we've done, Lauren, I'm a big fan of building what I call a machine to work for you. So when you look at the real estate that we own, we're sitting on just under 9 million in real estate. And when we look at the net worth of that 3.5 million, I'd say about 800,000 is equities. Well, it's broken out between equities and Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2.7 is real estate, plus or minus some other things. But if we do it that way, that means on 9 million in real estate value, we have about 6.3 million in debt. Most of that debt is at an average, I'd say, of about 2.5% interest. So very, very low.
Yeah.
We just signed a vacation rental property that we'll be renting out at an $800,000 mortgage at 1.3% interest, variable rate. So if prime moves, the rate will go up. But what that engine does is, if real estate only appreciates with inflation an average of 3% per year, our net worth will go up $270,000 a year. When I look at the amount of debt that's getting paid down between us and our tenants, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 a year. And cash flow is low right now as the properties are new, but over time that cash flow will grow. And so the idea is that the real estate portfolio we've built for ourselves, on average in a given year, should allow our net worth to go up about $500,000 a year.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah,
that's
thank you.
powerful. And that's the power of leverage. And that's something that real estate really gives you better than any other investment vehicle. So, anything else to add before we wrap it up for today?
I don't want to get too crucified on the debt numbers. I think when I ran them, we were somewhere around 60% loan to value. So even if there's, a correction in real estate, our equity relative to our debt is fairly high. So I'm comfortable carrying those loads, and the cash flows on the properties are very good. So I feel great about that. Anything else? No, I think you nailed it. One of the things for people, have a plan, know what you want. Step one, have a plan on how to do it, and then just be consistent. A lot of Lauren's guests, they're going to talk about consistency over time as the key to reach your financial independence. So whether it's equities, whether it's real estate, whatever it is for you, just be consistent with your investment strategy over time, and you will be successful simply through the power of compounding.
Well said. And that's exactly what I was just going to say. So, I will skip right to, would you like to tell listeners how to get in touch with you?
Sure, you can find me on Twitter. It's grow with Clint, underscore between each word. And you can also find me on clint-robert-murphy.com, or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I have the Pursuit of Learning podcast.
Everyone, you can follow me on Twitter at Adulting is Easy. I'm also on Facebook. I poke my head in there occasionally. You can email me at realadultingiseasy@gmail.com. You can show your support at patreon.com/adultingiseasy. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Hopefully, Clint and I have made adulting a little easier for you.